So a few things I want to touch upon in this blog, since it's not really, it's just pictures, but it was at the it reminds me of certain things at the time. Basically a dream I had regarding the solar system, kind of, and archons. Like, I realized that's when I realized that they call them the Zonai, or the Zonae, and then there's also the Azonae. The planets, basically, as the archons, not even just the planets, but also the times, and that's why Abraxas is 365, and because the space and times, and then also like the angels and demons, so to speak. And they say that for all the 72 demons, there's also angels, and if you read like the Goetia of Dr. Rudd, and it's just, there's a lot to that, and it's why the whole term Arctæon, that's the name of this blog, was a name given to Frater Achad. Snake's trying to coil up. He needs to get out though and get some exercise, and he ate the other day. But Arctæon, it's actually spelled Arktion, and it equals 360 in the connotation, or the context Amalantra gives it in Liber 729. But Arctæon, it's got a lot of like different connections, and if you add it up in the way I spelled it there, which is the way I felt like it should be spelled, or the way I saw it, it's 344, and 344 has a lot of connections with Frater Achad. They just happen to accumulate in that number I saw, like whenever I was making the database. And yeah, like 18, this is the 18th post, and I've been thinking about that because I mentioned it in the last post regarding 17 and that whole like numerical series that is implied in the tarot, because like the 18th tarot card is the moon, but Kaf is the 17th letter, and I don't know, it's just, it talks, the moon's related to the 16 kalas also, and their reflection. And so yeah, 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6, and in one of its formats, obviously, it's also 9 plus 9, and there's just a lot to either one of those ways if you look at it. And 9 times 9 is 81, the reflection of 18, and the formula of Alim in witchcraft, and Yesod is 80, and again, that series of progressions, if you look at the gematриas of all those, and their interconnections and stuff, and unfoldment, it's really interesting, especially because it shows how 9 is what you could call either the astral light or the it's like the fabric, and then it comes, like, again, in Malkuth, it comes together in sort of like formulation. And then 11 is obviously like the cast off reflexes or shells, the shadow, or in the spaces in between and all that, and the space beyond. And another thing about what I was trying to get at with in the last video with the whole Set, the cult of Set, and the Heaven's Gate cult, and the only connection there is just simply the fact that Set obviously represents the outsider and the outside force, and it's hard to explain, but basically that's what the whole standing stone, or the phallus of Set, and the standing stone and phallus of Set have the same value, which is also it's a lot of things, but the standing stone is basically the fourth dimension, or it's the hidden pillar, and the middle pillar itself is they call it, basically you can look at the 3 paths of the middle pillar. It's 463 because it's Tau, Samek, and Gimel. And 463 is like the magic wand, and it's associated with a lot of things. And it just goes to show, again, how it's this magical light, so to speak, or this thread, the astral thread, that weaves its way in a holographic manner through like all the numbers and all manifestation and phenomena in a way that's non-linear, really. And it's our minds that are linear. And so, I don't know, it's just like Carl Jung called synchronicity the acausal connecting principle. And the word acausal happens to be 107. And 107 seems to be this like acausal connecting force throughout all of this stuff, because it's the egg, it's the Greek word for zero, it's the Greek word for yoga, and all right there is just like this whole, a lot of connections, basically, the connections between Kenneth Grant and Crowley's work, the connection between the ancient like Tibetan and even the Hindu, the egg, and Egyptian myths. All this stuff is like symbolic. You just have to have an attention span to be able to see how it comes together, and you have to be able to have like what is it? The ability to understand from other people's perspectives and give them the benefit of the doubt, and see that, again, like I don't expect to be taken as like not only an authority on the subject, but I don't think, again, this is like conclusive. It's just it's part of my process of coming to understand certain things. And so inevitably it's going to be, unfinished. So yeah, Arctæon, there's a lot of connections behind that. And the dream I had, I really can't even explain it. It was just more like a realization that beyond my ego, beyond myself and my own timeline and time and body and stuff, beyond, like the galaxy, if you think about it four-dimensionally, like where something starts out like a seed and then it ends up, dying, but there's all these metaphors like the tree of life or the seed. Anyway, there's a sort of toroidal quality to the time cycle, and to looking at it four-dimensionally, or really five-dimensionally, and I've tried to get into the fifth dimension in my later posts after reading, the fourth dimension by Hinton, and then the work of Uspensky and Vera Stanley Alder's book, The Fifth Dimension. What I think the fifth dimension is it's synonymous with the fifth element. And if time is the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension is really the actual substance or data or plasmic, I say plasma or plasmic for lack of a better term, but it's really where it's where the holographic contents of data are really able to fold up and unfold in a way. That's why it's like the Akasha. And yet again, the Akasha is 107, and Kenneth Grant doesn't mention that, though he does mention in regards to 107 that it veils the formula for opening the space gates, or the gates of the elements, basically. And again, that's with the whole swastika and the elements and the Aleph connection to Tau and Earth, basically, or Malkuth. And again, Malkuth, 111, all these things are little signs along the way, and it helps to keep it's hard to remember all this stuff, so you'll end up going through that circle over and over and over until you can recognize it. Even then, I mean, you're still going to go through it. It's easier to see the blueprint, so to speak, and therefore make better decisions, I guess, more informed decisions, rather than operating on a code subconsciously, and knowing, oh, there's something to this, but I just don't quite see or get it, when the answers have been, that's the thing. that's why I say it's like it's not necessarily all the new books and new information that provides the access and the keys. It's really the old information being integrated with, so you can really actually understand the context of the present. And that's the problem again with like, well, it's not just the problem. There's a lot of potentialities, and that is the problem with this sort of stuff. Is again, there's all this overshadowing and clouding and distractions and setbacks, and people just pervert, like fucking with this knowledge and using it as a weapon, when it can also, I mean, and over time, since people take things for granted and lose the knowledge of how things like our computers and our nuclear reactors and stuff, I doubt our present generation is really going to stay up to par with the way, you know, the education system is, the way the food system, and just all that. It's going to be hard for us to keep up. There's a lag in all that, and that's why they want things increasingly mechanized to the point where, like, I don't know. I just watched this new video by Truth Stream Media, and they were talking about cybernetics, and they even pulled up this book that I have tons of books, so it's no wonder, but they had God and Golem Inc. by Norbert Wiener, and he talks, like, I found it at the bookstore, and I thought it was significant because at the time I was reading De Homunculo, Liber 367, and contemplating this whole idea of like the connection between, again, transhumanism and the whole idea of transhumanism, and then also and how similar it is to the idea of magic in the creating of, you know, automata, as they're called. And even Leibniz talks about that, and just the whole Solomonic magical tradition is kind of about that. And that's the thing, is really the true key to all that. And like even with voodoo, how I said it's like the elements and it's very mechanistic. We take for granted our technology and the fact that it is mechanistic and it's using nature to do our will. And not only that, it's to the extent we're able to not only just send messages via basically a mental, like through the mind, it's using mental apparatuses basically, or augmentation. But obviously whole masses and crowds of people can be manipulated, and almost like algorithmically. And again, algorithmic is 777, and it just goes to show how algorithmic this stuff is. And yeah, basically this code is completely applicable. Every time I see these news articles about like the brain chips and the just all this stuff, and I decode it, I see how obvious the code fits. And yet everyone's like panicking and freaking out and doesn't understand. Like that's the problem, is it's going to take 10 to 20 to 50 to 100 years for people to slowly integrate this. And like there's going to be fucking all sorts of bullshit like going through the cycle. We have to go through the cycle basically. And I'm just like, for people who have already gone through certain cycles, you can already see beyond that, and you can see it coming. And you're, how do you really explain it? Some people obviously are like, that's the problem, is the lag of when someone discovers something, and then it takes society, usually society hates it, and they try to they find it abhorrent or threatening or whatever, and then they finally accept it after it's been somehow integrated, usually by like authorities or something, and then they act like, oh, we knew this all along. And that's kind of like the case with, again, like with all the teachers. And it's just kind of the one of the things of, the scientific the structure of scientific revolutions, and the whole martyrdom and whatnot. Like Marilyn Manson comes to mind again. Uh, these people who provide outlets, or like ways out, ways of thinking outside of the norm. Again, the Setian or satanic current has a benefit to it in that sense. Like that's why it's connected to science and evolution and blah blah blah. That's not to say like to cling to that or anything. That's why I think that the satanic church, or the Church of Satan and all that, they're kind of contradictory in that sense, that in trying to be so anti-conformist or whatever, they end up being a cliche and become their own stereotype. Same with the Thelemites. And again, like I had considered myself like an atheist for a time. And I hated any and all religion and everything to do with it. And now over time, like after it was through looking at the contradictions of the Bible and being persecuted by so-called Christians, or people who, in the name of Christianity, when neither they nor I knew much about, the deeper aspects of it. So I was trying to look for just like contradictions, and in that, it caused me to like see how deep the Bible was. And then I saw like gematria and all that. And again, this was when I was like 15, 16, 17, and then stumbled upon Crowley and felt like, holy shit. Like I didn't read it, but I went to I wrote a biography basically on Aleister Crowley in my senior year. And I wrote way over the allotted, like, what was needed or called for. And I wish I still had that, but I don't. And I didn't even end up having, like, we were all supposed to read it in front of the class. And the teacher still gave me a good grade, even though I didn't, because she knew I was out of place. I just moved to that school, didn't know anyone. And even though I put a lot of effort into the essay, that kind of counted for my not having to present it or whatever. I actually just didn't show up the 2 days that we were supposed to. But yeah, Crowley, like whenever I went to the bookstore Borders, and I found book 4, and I was looking through it, and I saw like the stuff about the Book of the Law, and I started trying to read it, and instantly it was familiar, like in a way that I couldn't understand. Like I was like, whoa. It shook me to like it gave me this feeling that made my hair stand up, and I was like in their little coffee shop for a few hours looking through it just in amazement. And that's why I felt, again, like I needed to read it slowly and process it and edit it and all that, enabling me to basically read it 3 or 4 times. And I see what, like, basically his whole thought process, and it's allowed me, like, I think that's why, yeah, it's a lot of work, and all this stuff is a lot of time and a lot of, seconds and minutes, and, that's fine though. I mean, if that's too much, then it's too much, and oh well. But for those who, I'm just trying to give little signposts myself, because I didn't have anyone to really talk to about any of this stuff until quite a ways down the line. But once I did, it helped a little. But then I realized that can also be constricting and limiting. And you really, the only thing about a guru is to help you find your own center. And once that's done, then you almost can, you'll always still have teachers, but you're always still learning. Um, but in a way, like it makes me think of the whole, like before I actually got into Crowley and like found out his system is called the AA. I had like went to AA, like I was familiar with the AA steps, the 12 steps, and um, just because I got in trouble as a kid, and they made me take classes and stuff like that. So, and their whole thing is like to find a higher power and look beyond, like above yourself, beyond yourself, and that was also kind of what I realized. Like I think it's the third or fourth chapter, whichever the chapter in the blue book about God and finding the higher power is. That was one of the pivotal things that I read that got me to question my own hostility, I guess, towards that whole idea of a higher power. And because that's what we have, a selfish sort of egotistical idea of, again, what we see in our own mind, and it's very solipsistic and irrational in a lot of ways. And like I was, that's the cool thing about some of this stuff, like when books come right when you're kind of looking, like right when you need them. And I was contemplating this whole fourth dimension and hidden pillar thing, and then that's when all of a sudden, like I had seen The Fourth Way, the book The Fourth Way by Uspensky, on the bookshelf at I don't know how many times. Usually it was like a tattered sort of paperback, and this is a good example of when I saw it, like I realized how much our minds block out things and how much it is what we're looking for, and how that is based very much subconsciously, and it's not even so much conscious. And that's a lot of that is all the fourth way teachings, and the fourth way, the fourth wall, the fourth dimension, the hidden pillar, and the whole magnetic energy center, and all these teachings kind of combine. And so then I saw what was it? Tertium Organum, and that, like I saw The Fourth Way, like I said, a few times, never got it, never really picked it up. I didn't think it would have that much insight, and because just the looks of it was kind of plain. But then I found Tertium Organum, and I was looking through it, and I saw he was mentioning the fourth dimension, and tertium being like three. It was like the third book of, like knowledge, basically. And I was like, holy shit, this is oddly exact, because I went to the bookstore just like I do usually on the weekend, and looking for something new, and so it stood out to me, and I don't know, it was just weird how much it was spot on. And he mentions the fourth dimension book that Crowley also recommends, and Crowley even says, like, after the first few chapters he doesn't understand what he's talking about. And yeah, it is complicated, and you're supposed to cut out these like square things, and to see how what he's talking about plays out. And I can kind of get maybe what he's saying, just with the whole Kalas and the Voodoo Gnostic workbook, and how the future basically is it's an extension of the mind. It's the transcendental id or ego, and like, well, there's different levels again, and how the past and the future, it's like the seed analogy in the tree. It's all connected by like it's just, that's the whole evolutionary thing. And again, that's like the materialistic connection. Everything is a kind of mechanistic machine, and it is very cause and effect. It is very elemental, but then again, it's that the relationship, it's that background force or that background noise. Really, it's related to Turiya too, the fourth state of consciousness, in which all three states are kind of blended. Not just blended; it's the backdrop of all three, and the thread of all three. And again, that's like the final hay. And all these things, the final hay, the fourth dimension, I'm trying to bring them up to show the similarity. And again, it's like it's it's not good to necessarily like blend everything to the point that it's all just, indistinguishable. And that's why religions and stuff, like it is good in some senses to see the similarity, but then it's also good to distinguish and allow them to express their unique cultural, motifs or whatever. Because like even just artistically, the Mayans and the Egyptians and the Asian and the all of it's like got its own little flavor, and I don't think that should be, blended up. But you can though see that those how things go back to the same root source, and new numbers help see that underlying source. And like Hermes, or the Emerald Tablet of Hermes, says that everything is one substance, and that goes with this whole idea of Kether. Again, everything just being one aspect, like part of the one manifestation of Kether. If it's called the smooth point, and it's where everything is perfect in its own way. But so yeah, the whole thing about 18 and the 666 and the hidden pillar. Kenneth Grant links 18 to Isis and the connection between the restoring of the phallus, basically, and that whole legend, and how 666 veils that and this lost knowledge, and how with the hidden word or the lost word or the lost phallus, you can regenerate basically a universe or even the knowledge itself. Like in the OTO, the De Ars Magica, he says, with this knowledge, with the knowledge of this key, like you can restore any lost knowledge. Like, and again, it goes back with how 666 is that number of the violent cataclysms, and there's a lot of other things like that, like apocalyptic sort of things. But again, they're all just expressions, and that's how the geometrical emergence or manifestation itself, it expresses itself through these patterns or through lines of force and webs. And 344, again, it's 100 less than 444, or 11 more than 333. So it's like the exact SAR egg. But it's Arctæon, it's the child of thy bowels, the obsidian egg in 107, OIV, VIO, plus VIO, OIV, which he took those formulae. Like his first one was VIO, which was 86. It's the univocity of being and boundless source and forces. The univocity of being, like that came up because I found this book by René Guénon called The Multiple States of Being, The Multiple States of the Being. And René Guénon has a lot of good books, but that one came up again also kind of a little after the whole Uspensky and Gurdjieff and Maurice and Nicole all came out, and like as far as to my, like they came up to my knowledge or whatever. Like I was aware of them, but I wasn't aware of the significance. It didn't activate to me until I went through all this other Crowley stuff, and that's like I see how some of it is beside like like Crowley's adventures, so to speak, were they're kind of just beside the point as far as your own work, what the work that is intended to be done by the initiate or the adept or whatever themselves. And Frédéric Chaude, though, that's why I see some of Frédéric Chaude, like Crowley, and this whole playing out that took place with what's discussed in book 4 and later on and through Kenneth Grant's books. That's like an external magical manifestation, whereas the stuff about Gurdjieff and Uspensky to me is a lot more mystical, and it has a lot more inner work. Like that, if you read their stuff, you'll end up becoming attuned to. And that's what that came up when I was realizing, like there's only so much that can be done externally and like with humans and with technology and with all this stuff. True evolution, for us to go any further, is going to have to be internal. And that's really where a lot of this stuff is at. And unfortunately, that's where people want the work done for them. This was my apartment complex area in Arizona whenever I was beginning a lot of this stuff. And this was like on Halloween, I believe, or was getting ready for Halloween. And I was just playing around with face paint. But and realizing the symbolism of the mask, how everything's just a mask for the inner light or the astral light. And I don't know, I thought it was funny. I was talking about money and I forgot to mention it, but like last year I had to create a new bank account, and they sent me a debit card, and it just so happened to be with their little number pin thing, 666. Thought that was I was like, damn, all this work with 666, and there's this. I wonder if they know, like, is it... But, so, I want to go back to the whole 6 plus 6 plus 6, or chi, 10 plus 8, really, or 8 plus 10. Chi, or ki, or kai. It's funny because that is, like, or, it's Vav, Vav, Vav. People have talked about how the www, World Wide Web, is 666, which obviously it's really 18. And 18, it has a lot of deep things, like, but I don't even want to get into all this stuff right now because I feel like trailing off, and it's kind of just it's not defeats the purpose, but people lose sight of certain things when you do that. But 18 ties in so much with all these other bigger things. Again, like these numbers, again, the gematria shows how the numbers do interrelate and interconnect, and not even just the numbers, but I've mentioned Alfred Korzybski a few times, and later on in other posts in his work with general semantics, and how language is just one level, like it's the superficial outer shell level of communication and meaning, and especially not like transmission of knowledge or time binding. It's funny, knowledge is lost over time, is 777, which is general semantics and all this stuff about sound and language and transmission and the shells and the mind, and time even. Again, these are the numbers and all this stuff. They're just templates, and it's parsing of data and breaking it into, it's seeing the dynamic interplay of language and of meaning. And in a way, meaning is the whole meaning behind the cells or the shells or the numbers of gematria, because each number has a meaning in a way, but the meaning is it's innumerable, it's unquantifiable in its true essence. And again, essence is just, for lack of a better term, another term denoting basically the spaces in between and the vibrations, the reverberations, the resonances, and that's kind of what chi, like as the reverberate, the life force emanating from the sun, kind of symbolizes, because it is like chi is like the electric force that electrifies things, you know, and um, and so I don't know. There seems to be some connection between the star, the sun, and the moon tarot cards and their numerology and their symbology relating to this interplay and this sort of transmission of starlight or starfire, and it's lensing or raying into denser levels of or magnitudes of manifestation. And that's like when you look at Gurdjieff and Uspensky's sort of little numerological rendition of the chain of being in the absolute and all that. It symbolizes this sort of density of or magnification, really, of manifestation. And the magnetic energy center, magnitude. There is a magnetism really is this another connection between the whole like essences, and the connection between the 0 and the 1 is sort of a magnetic connection. And if you look into how data storage is, affected, it's through binary magnetic mechanisms. And I keep bringing up stuff I'm going to end up talking about, but it's necessary. And these posts are kind of just free range, like whatever happens. Anyway, so Gurdjieff uses this term a lot called or mechanicalness. Like he says, the mechanicalness of humanity. Like we need to get over this mechanicalness, and a lot we are again resistant even to that idea. Like people are resistant to the idea, because I myself was resistant to the idea of mind control. I was like, oh, you would be able to tell if you've got mind control, and it seems it's hard to imagine until you really look into the subject. But in the same way, we don't like to believe we're mechanical beings, or we're biocomputers in a lot of ways, and we are subject to a sort of cause and effect and a formula. And that's the thing, though. Like the whole problem, main problem in philosophy is there free will, or is it deterministic? And is your idea or illusion of free will just created by, again, like the ego, and reinforced and defended and whatnot, when really all our options are deterministic, and our responses and stuff are quantifiable and deterministic as well. And that's this whole debate. And yet that's the problem, is there's a lot of problems like with all this stuff. Like, first of all, empirical data is usually, first of all, comes from statistics, and statistics aren't really accurate portrayals of the actual of like instances, and that kind of negates a lot of hidden variables and whatnot that need to actually be investigated rather than just cut out and ignored. And basically, I'm trying not to trail off, but basically, like the whole mechanicalness, it's 333 again, and 333 is this number implying both the mechanicalness, or the structure, the cosmos, and the chaos outside of it. And that's why it's symbolic of Set and Karanzan and all that stuff. And let's see. But yeah, people are very resistant. I was, to the idea of mind control, and mechanicalness. And I think that's what we fear, though, also, is being mechanical and being mechanical animals. But again, it's by recognizing those patterns and the codes and the cause and effect and responses and stuff, especially the subtle ones, the subconscious ones. Only through that can you actually overcome it and stuff, because obviously, like this, that's the thing about the gematria and these codes and numbers. And the fact, I think that's really what's so off-putting about them, is the fact that they're so obvious that they were just right under our noses, like right, it's so in your face. That's why some of these codes to me have taken a long time to set in. I'm like, holy shit, how did I not see that? And it just, it goes to show again, like slowing things down. And because I'm always in a race, I'm always trying to look for new knowledge, and especially in the past. And that's just, sometimes it's not futile. It's just sometimes that's not always the what's really going on. And I don't know. That's just what. Like it was only recently I've known of this book because I've seen it like on, what is it, Starfire's website and stuff a while back. That book, Beelzebub and the Beast by David Hall, and I ended up finding it at the store, and I was going through it, and I was like, holy shit, I didn't realize how much he links Crowley's system with Gurdjieff and all that, and Uspensky, and I was getting into that in my most recent posts from 2017, and I wish, like, maybe it's better I didn't have that book, because then it helped me to see all these things on my own. But that book is really important and interesting, and the guy obviously ties in a lot of different knowledge, and that's what I love. Like, I love a book with all these connections and opening doorways to other books and because each book is a doorway kind of to a new form of thinking and information that will change your outlook on reality. And I think that's what, again, also is kind of one of the resistant elements in especially this work, is it demands that you keep going, and there's very little there. I don't know. There's not much rest. Like, you get rest, yeah, you're gonna have to slow down and integrate things over time, but you can't just stop and be like, oh, I'm done and that's it, and this is the way things are, and this is the way I'm going to do it, and then expect it to turn out okay, at least, because things change. And like, I don't know. Again, I'm just discussing things right now. I a little bit of time, but yeah, like the galaxy in a way is kind of like a lotus, and lotus, using a Vav for AN, is 111, and again, 111 is that unfolding number. It implies the 1, the 10, the 100, and 1111 is, a lot of people like on the internet talk about it, and they're like, oh, this is what it means. And again, like, no one ties in the Kabbalah to this stuff or uses the Kabbalah to analyze these puzzles. And I've discussed it quite a bit, because it's so many things. Like, it's Prometheus, and what is the myth of Prometheus? He brings the fire from heaven to man, which is like the Revelation 13:13 thing. And what is 1111? It's this like channel or pillar, the middle pillar, so to speak. Um, I'll get into this post soon enough. It's all about the like when I realized how Kabbalistic the whole thing about transhumanism is, and yeah, people want this knowledge, but yet for some reason they don't want the knowledge either, and that's why I say that the very fact that this is people are resistant to knowledge itself just goes to show that it needs to be out there, and people don't need to be so scared and sensational about the way in which some of this stuff is, because that gives it that sort of negative power. Whereas if you use this technology for yourself and invert it basically, because it's already inverted, its true value can be utilized. And so yeah, I like the search function thing. What is the next post? 19's like, I keep talking about all these. I know that's going to trigger some people, and it's designed to do that. Yeah, this deconstructing the construct. 19 has a lot of connections to it as well, and I'll pull up some stuff regarding it. Let's see. Oh yeah, pure DMT and DMT, Daleth Mem. That's with a teth, but Daleth Mem Tau is 444, and there's a lot of connections there. I mean, I say that, but I mean, I say that about everything, but I mean, it's true. It's the tangled light of new Isis is one of the terms Kenneth Grant uses. And I don't know, the egg and the fact this stuff is like, I don't know, people don't want the egg broken, but the egg is already broken. Actually, before I stopped this, I wanted to mention a few more things about basically 18 and my ideas about it, and how basically it being chi and pretty much the kalas and the lunar force basically transmitted from the sun and the stars basically, and basically how this stuff, again, it connects with these densifications or the chains of the absolute. And there's a series of books by Harriet and Homer Curtis, who had this thing, I guess they called the Order of Christian Mystics, or the Order of 15. And they had all these different books, and two of them are like about numerology and the tarot, and they go through the numbers first, like 1 through 11, and then I guess 12 through 22. And they also mention 0. And they have a bunch of different versions, I guess, or reprintings of this. And I have a paperback version, but I haven't been able to find the hardcovers. But they're probably not as in good of shape anyway. But at this point, they're very old. But I found Realms of the Living Dead, which is interesting, and the Message of Aquaria. They were talking about like these coming changes, and a lot of people obviously were at that time. And it's funny just realizing, obviously, they like the shadow they sort of felt, the shadow of the internet and the shadow of all this growth, and the like even the Hopis even saw like spider webs and train tracks and possible another like Atlantean destruction, or similar to that whole legend. So yeah, the key to the universe is the first half, or the first part of the book or series, and I can't recommend them like more. So I haven't mentioned them so far, I don't think. I know I have in the blog. It took me a while to find them and get to them, but they they have more than just one chapter on each number. They have like 5 chapters, and see, they talk about it, and they're aware of the secret doctrine, and they kind of tie that in, but they also tie the Bible into it a lot, and other occult knowledge. And it's funny, like, these are another set of books and people who are very, very deep and have a lot to offer, yet they're not talked about. They're almost forgotten. And yet a lot of knowledge probably came from them and through them. It passed through them, I'm sure. And see, the circle. This is where I learned some of the insights about the circle and all the connections, and it helps you to see the sort of abstract or elastic way in which these things can be thought of and expand and just connect and hearken to other things. But then thinking back to M-O-on, Mother Egg. But yeah, let me get to 18. It'll be in... The second book is called The Key of Destiny. And... Now bend thy head and listen, O Bodhisattva. Compassion speaks and saith, Can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry, Thou art enlightened, choose thy way, the voice of the silence. Let us first consider the number 18 according to its separate digits. Here we find 1, the straight and narrow way, and the rod of power, or the magic wand, standing at the right hand of the spiral path of the physical evolution, number 8. And 8 is like the spring, if you look at a string vibrating, and obviously the different vibrational resonances determine the whole octave and frequency and whatnot. The most obvious meaning of this number is therefore that of contrast, i.e. God's way is directing, unswerving, straight, true. Man's way is evoluted, curved, doubling on itself. And again, that's it's funny because 18 is chi, but it's also sin or hate in Hebrew, and that just shows like a lot of connections. The inverse, obviously, the inner and outer, the alchemical, in a way, and psychic processes. But here in 18 we find this curved line of physical evolution has accomplished its cycle, past its first initiation and has taken the one life to be the determining factor in all its future unfoldment. If we take number 18 in its totality of 1 plus 8, it gives us 9, and since the angel of revelation measured with his golden reed 144 cubits according to the measure of man, that is, of the angel, this again confirms the idea of 18 being the second initiation, since 1 plus 4 plus 4 equals 9, or initiation, in which the initiate must measure the walls of his inner life. The word angel means messenger, here evidently meaning God's messenger to lesser evolved humanity into the lower kingdoms. A superman or an initiate, for man has not attained the measure of man until he has become an initiate. In fact, at this step, the discipline has made the one life a golden reed with which he measures all things pertaining to his new life. And like the angel spoken of, through the power of this golden reed, he sees to it that his city, his life with all its inhabitants, is 4 square, both outer and inner. 4 plus 4 is 8. The gates, centers thereof, and the walls thereof. And that's like the Bhagwa, or the directions again. And so the 9th is the I, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, and again, the astral light. The fact that the length and breadth and height of this city are equal, being 12,000, 4 plus 4 plus 4 is 12 furlongs each, is another reference to the completed experience of the 12 zodiacal signs and their 12 forces. 3 times 12 is 36, which is 9, the completed initiation of matter, the triune God manifested in the three-dimensional universe. It should also be noted that 12,000 furlongs equals 7,920,000 feet, which by occult addition is 18 and 9. and when repeated for each of the 3 dimensions gives 23,7600,000 feet, which again gives us 18 or 9. The disciple has now grasped the rod of power in his right hand and made of it a staff on which to lean. As he passes through the valley of the shadow of death, the point in number 8 where the curves cross each other, he can now say, "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Leaning upon this staff, he passes over the dread valley of death and carries on his evolution uninterrupted by physical death. Yet from this point on, he must use his rod to measure, test, and square his outer life, the walls of his city, with his inner experiences. And remember, the walls is 777, and that goes with the shells and the chronosphere, basically the time, and the dark doorway of the beast as well, which is the sort of gateway of the Qliphoth and all that. So, when he begins thus both to lean upon the one life and use it as a measure for his own life, he cannot but find it is also a magic wand. As he ceases to trust in his own power, he finds the seductions of the senses more and more subject to the divine inner sense, and with this magic wand of trust and righteousness, a decision is no longer so difficult to attain and manifest. Again, number 8 is the circle, which we have already found to be a container of all the potencies out of which the light shall bring perfection, but now twisted or turned upon itself. The serpent no longer swallows its tail, thus completing its cycle, but writhes and twists in space, and out of the contortions of its writhing, it brings forth a perverted image of itself, so that the light of the Christos, or the dot in the center, is partially obliterated by the crossed lines, the cross of crucifixion. Hence we call the serpent force evil, the devil, and the tempter. But in 18 we have seen the vision of the straight and narrow path. The dot has unfolded into the one and become the axis around which our life turns. And at this step, the initiate has faced this one divine truth and felt the mighty urge of the one life. Henceforth he strives to make the twisted line 8 subservient to the straight line 1, that is, at his right hand. Therefore he struggles no more, but fearlessly lifts up the writhing serpent, and like Aaron, makes of it the rod of power, knowing that it must ultimately bring both equilibrium and balance to himself and to mankind. Eliphas Levi associates 18 with all that is magical, especially the glamour produced by love filters, etc. In this he is correct, but we differ somewhat in the application. The ideas expressed in this number are, firstly, that of evolution, 8, which inevitably leads to initiation, 18, which is 9, or 9 plus 9. Secondly, the eternal, immutable fixity of the one law of the good destined forever to bring man back, even though to straighten the twisted line of evolution he must vanquish his last enemy of death, or as it is expressed in Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, fill up the slough of despond which lies in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death. Therefore, the connection of this number with magic, glamour, and love filters must be carefully considered. In number 18, the initiate has lifted up the rod of power, but has not yet been tested as to the use he makes of it. He has proved that by it he can perform so-called magic, for he has done so in his own body. The magic wand in his hands must be used to strike the rock, that the waters of life may gush forth to refresh thirsty humanity, fainting in the desert of life, or may be used as sorcery or black magic to enslave his less evolved brethren. This last, however, can only occur when he becomes the victim of the glamour of his own attainments. As to love filters, while they have little intrinsic power, there is more truth in the possibility of their effectiveness than is often supposed. The major effect produced by such concoctions is the result of the deliberate will put into the words, spoken over them, by the one preparing them, and the magnetic force coming from one who has learned how to make use of this willpower, rather than the ingredients themselves, although these may actually stimulate the sex functions. Today, the magician generally prefers to work directly on the aura of the victim, rather than through the hocus-pocus so effective in the dark ages of ignorance and superstition. According to Eliphas Levi, number 18 is strongly affinitized to the subject of sex. and the many vile teachings rife today bear a close relationship to the medieval dabbling in love philters, glamours, and black magic, for the seduction of the senses preeminently includes the perversion of sex and the waste of the life forces. Once having strayed from the straight and narrow way, the initiate has lost his own power, hence must depend upon the whims of the incubi of the lower astral, who must be constantly propitiated through the pouring out of the physical life force, either as blood or as sex force. And see, another funny thing about magic and this stuff is that a lot of people are focused outward and stuff and looking for affirmations, or looking for, again, to use this sort of thing as a sort of self-aggrandizing thing, or to manipulate people for their own will or lack thereof, like to vampirize them basically. And in a way, that's why I see the whole thing about, what is it, like asceticism and chastity. Chastity happens to be 107, which is the egg, and Crowley talks about the virtue of chastity, and he seems to understand it ironically more than anyone else, because it's like addiction, kind of like. And 333 again is acrasia, the weakness of will, and yet at the same time 333 is all about the will, and because it's an amplification of 93, like, because anything with 93 with the S is basically subtract the Samek and add a shin, and it's 333, like Silba or the seed. And anyway, also again 333 being Karanzan, and how it's this connection thing. That's why all these things come up, and that's why it's like a gateway or portal number. But again, the will in 18 and all this stuff, like, again, that's like how I'm connecting the. It's funny that God and Golem book comes up literally in one of these videos recently, and then I'm once again getting to this number to talk about all this stuff, and it is about the automata, or creating what you could call magical machines, or just anything that will. It's like a sigil which carries on a desire, and that's literally what obviously logos are, and that's why it goes back to logos, and logos take out the O's, and you have the LGS or S sigil thing again. And like, what's one of the more, I was just realizing again, like, it's almost meant to be a sort of example, but one of the most common symbols in America is, again, the McDonald's arches, and McDonald's is 222, which again is like this code. It's a very obvious code, but it was one for me that was hard to tap into at first, and slowly I saw like how actually pervasive 222 is. But yeah, 18, all this stuff, it seems to be about basically, again, the meaning and will and charge. Charge again is 222, and 333 is ground charge. There's very electrical connections in all this. And so yeah, the God and Golem thing and technology and how all this stuff is, it's a very magician card sort of knowledge, in the sense that it's using the elements for our will, and unfortunately we've lost sight of that. We've taken it for granted. It's very much like the Atlantean thing, like our technology will destroy us because we don't understand it anymore. It's out of our hands. And so that's why, again, this whole thing about 666, 18, it being this black magic and glamour, and I'll get into it in the future posts, like as I go, but all this stuff about the numerology of transhumanism and the future inventions, even, that's what I found, is that since all this stuff encodes things so well and so deeply, you can extrapolate other knowledge, and it helps. You can build blueprints and stuff, and so by decoding, like reverse engineering, so to speak, some of this knowledge, I've been able to see how you can actually use it to engineer things. And I think to some extent, yeah, some people have done this. They're ahead of the curve, so to speak, while at the same time keeping it secret, keeping people from getting to this knowledge and seeing the other side of it, like the actual empowering aspect to it. Um, so hence the temptations at this step are fearful. Our protection lies in a realization that our powers come not from the astral entities who require obedience and propitiation, but from the divine Christ. Hence, at 18, the evolving soul must lay tight hold of this rod of power, recognizing that it is the one life, or Christ force, the ruler and sustainer of all manifestation. Yet there are still black magicians who have reached 18 and who have chosen to pervert their powers. Again, this is the moon card, and the moon, and all it's very much about, again, what like Kefra and the subconscious and the dark side and the ability to confront it. So Carl Jung and all his work talks about especially that. And Kenneth Grant, again, all of his work is kind of going into the dark side or the night side, which a lot of Thelemites won't do, even though that's what the true meaning of like all these things go back to, is these very deep connections that very few people have kept up with. And like you'll really have to go back to either Gerald Massey or Blavatsky or someone to see how this stuff is a lot deeper than anything you'll ever be able to hear on anything like Discovery Channel. Like that's the thing, all this ancient aliens, it's like designed to make all this shit just look fucking retarded. And some of obviously some of it is like some but you have to separate the wheat from the chaff and find again how this stuff, what is useful and what isn't. And I don't know, it's just for me there's a lot. For some people there wouldn't be anything. And that's not to say, I don't know. Anyway, there are also those whom we will call brothers of the shadow, i.e. neither deliberately black nor wholly white, who lead mankind astray, either for their own aggrandizement or through an inordinate belief in their own judgment, believing, since they know more than others, they have the right to compel others to follow and obey them. Their life may be centered in the one divine life, and they may think they use the rod of power only to help and uplift, but they insist upon absolute allegiance to them or to their way of thinking, having fanatically argued themselves into the belief that their way is the best way for all. But just as the black magician can only harm one who is affinitized in some way to him, and who deliberately opens his heart to the glamour thrown over him, so the brothers of the shadow can only lead astray such souls as desire adulation, pomp, and show of power rather than divine truth, who are easily flattered and led on by specious promises, always about to be fulfilled. Also those who are seeking a justification for unlawful indulgence in some form of satisfaction or desire. Hence, welcome anyone who, under the guise of spiritual teachings, will give them an excuse for breaking the law of God and man. See, and I think that sometimes even Christians and stuff do that, obviously, and yet they call people a cult. Like, not all people who are into this sort of stuff are like these crazy Hollywood cult members that are, literally trying to suck the blood of every, of youth or whatever. Because I'm not at all like that. I see all that shit, and it sucks because it makes all this stuff, it's just another veil that will make it even ever so harder for people to ever break out of the trance of looking for authority figures and looking for the truth to be told and looking for the news and waiting for scientists to tell them, it's not going to happen that way. Like, it's just, that's sad to me that people think even that way. And because I see it in my, like, again, my everyday life, my own family, I don't talk to them about this stuff. They don't recognize, they think, you know, that it's a waste of time because they don't understand. They haven't read any of this stuff. They haven't seen how, for me at least, it was a way out of a lot of, you know, ways of thinking. And again, like the dark doorway of the beast in 777, what to me that symbolizes is, again, the world of the shells being 777, the Olam HaKlaphoth, and all those connections, the walls, especially of the mind, and the dark doorway of the beast, turning that around and showing how there is a basically a loophole, so to speak, uh, in your thinking, that you can get out of, you can think outside of the box. In I knew that, like, obviously you could, like, as I was always doing that as a kid. I was like thinking way outside the box and thinking about just what's beyond this and what's beyond me, and what, like, I was always very self-reflective at a very young age, to the point that it affected my social interactions with my own family and with at school and whatnot. And again, it wasn't until I came into contact with certain books, like, and had time to read the Bible, um, and that it caused me to slow down and really appreciate things in a deeper sense. And so, and again, that's why I guess I have a better appreciation for the so-called negatives in life, the, even, like, death consciousness, and um, because from those things you can extract so much knowledge. You can avoid them. You can learn from them. It's just, for whatever reason, again, like, knowledge itself has a charge to it that can be negative, I guess, because again, it's like, if people aren't ready for it, it won't fit in their worldview, or they won't grasp it at all. Like, it's just, they're blind to it. And that's, again, like the owl, the seeing in the dark, and yet the owl is associated with all these bad things, Bohemian Grove and the dollar bill and blah blah blah. But yet again, it's being able to discern and see 360 over time, especially, all that stuff that I've been trying to show. Uh, so to make anyway, to make 18 a true symbol of black magic, however, the 1 would have to be dominated by the 8, or the crooked path cast its shadow over the straight and narrow path so as to make it difficult to see. So that's basically what's happening. And again, some people want to see the bad rather than the good, and that only empowers that. And that's not to say, again, I'm aware of all the conspiracies and the corruption and the from every level from the ground level up. And again, I'm not aware of all the fucking connections. I'm not involved in any of it personally, but at least I'm aware. I've read, I've seen this shit play out, and I've seen them try to cover it up, and I've seen the way in which people don't give a fuck, or they empower it. Or, I mean, the few people who don't and see beyond it, they're just either silent about it and go on because they have, they're not distracted by it. But again, it's important to see both sides of the whole interplay. And more it's getting obvious with, like, just how all this stuff's coming out. And that's why I feel compelled to talk about this stuff now that at least I have a more firm grasp of how it plays out. A lot of people want to make all these videos and, like, again, like, oh, there's Masonic G's in the Flight of the Navigator staircase, and I don't know what that means, but it must be bad. Like, I've seen some pretty whacked out shit. And it's funny because this stuff, I know the presentation isn't the best, and it's long, and there's a lot of stuff, and it's going to be ridiculed and attacked, probably, if even anyone wastes any time on it at all. So I'm aware of that potential, but just goes to show, like, what are people afraid of when it comes. I mean, I'm not trying to negate or diminish the bad things in all this stuff. And again, the fact that it's being used against people and how we're playing into the code. But again, I'm trying to show this so people will fucking wake up. So here they even mention it with the $sign. The world today is working out its misuse of the power given to money, there being quite a similarity between 18 and the dollar mark. And again, like the Jewish knowledge of 18 is chi and whatnot. Money should be used as a blessing for all mankind instead of being a curse. Neither money nor the possession of other forms of wealth is evil in itself. It is evil only in the use made of it and in the power given to it by considering the money value of an object or idea the highest standard by which it is measured. In the coming new age, money value as a standard must give way to the standard of service or usefulness to the general good. Because of it's funny, like, do you expect socialism to ever really use that as the real, value system? I don't. Because of the resemblance of the $sign to number 18, it suggests the idea that we can never outgrow the curse of money until we learn to make of it an 18, i.e. until we use it as a rod of power with which to help on all evolution. Many altruistic and spiritually advanced persons are suffering today from a lack of money with which to help humanity because of their misuse of it in past incarnations. See, I don't know about that, but at least this part's true. And people, again, say, like, oh, well, if you're so great, if you're, you would have money, or, money is the what is it? The, like, I don't know, it's just, but usually, how come it's the richest people, and then even on YouTube, the most popular things are the dumbest, most retarded excuses for even humor. It's mind-numbingly fucking pathetic. Again, it just that's again about this 18 and the perversion of the life force. People this will play out, and it's like they want some bad things to happen, and I guess that's going to have to happen. It's not up to me. I mean, it's just up to the way things tend to go. So, in those days, through mistaken teachings as to the uses and obligations of wealth, those who aspired to spiritual development turned their backs upon the wealth which the great law had placed in their hands to administer for the best good of the community, and taking vows of poverty either turned their wealth over to the church or left it in the hands of those who were neither unselfish nor spiritually advanced enough to be guided through inspiration as to its proper and most helpful administration. Today, such persons find themselves possessed of all the spiritual development which resulted from their unselfishness, prayers, devotion, and spiritual aspiration, but without the physical means necessary to put their unselfish ideas into practice. And they will continue to suffer from lack of funds until they learn that they must not turn their backs upon anything which the great law brings to them, but must administer it as stewards, that which may accomplish its greater good or greatest good for all. When one has reached 18, having opened the door of power, he must face the awful accumulation which the misuse of this power has created through the ages. The very fact of his reaching this point, means that he must now set to work to redeem the results of this wrong use of power. Hence, unless he be very pure and strongly centered in the white light of truth, if he opens the door but a crack, all the pent-up forces, the product of ages, of such misuse of power, will sweep in like a pack of devils and drive him on to his own undoing, usually into black magic. Also, in the majority of cases, there is a personal karma to be adjusted. Very few pass this step the first time they essay it. Generally, it is only after many failures and bitter experiences that one can pass on in safety. Therefore, instead of condemning those who fail, we should send them the strength of love and sympathy. See, then they have another chapter about it. Initiation comprises two different but united sections. The theory of the resources and necessities of his enterprise, which the neophyte always receives as an inheritance which leaves him absolute liberty of thought, in practice, in which he exercises, under the direction of his masters, the physical, intellectual, and moral self-control which will render him an initiate. The Tarot of the Bohemians by Pappas. As we explained in number 8, the original presentation of 8 was in a horizontal position, the infinity, in which one circle represents man, the other woman, and when joined, they symbolize a balanced life. To manifest life in its fullness, the two circles must add the straight line or must individually take up the rod of power. While number 8 carries the idea of the two perfect circles touching and working out their evolution together, only the one standing at the right hand of the 8 can bring them in to this second initiation. The 8 man and woman are joined by the senses, and 18 by the one life. Number 8 in the horizontal position is called the symbol of life, i.e. that which has brought forth all life or evolution. It's like the cells. But while 8 unopened is a symbol of physical life, each circle must eventually be unfolded into 9. i.e. man and woman must receive their first initiation individually, but later must stand upright side by side as symbolized by the two pillars of Jachin and Boaz, and receive their second initiation together as 9 plus 9, 18. For every multiple of 9 brings about an initiation. This must be accomplished ere either can pass on the completion of the cycle, or pass on to this completion of the cycle and say, I and my Father are one. Thus, standing side by side, they have completed the balance because each has individually equilibrated the forces within, and together they can let go onto the third initiation. In the Sefer Yetzirah, number 18 is referred to equilibrium and is called the kingdom of the restored world, or the bride of Microprosopus. It also frequently refers to man and woman as the book of concealed mystery. The deepest mystery given to this planet to solve is conceded to be the mystery of the equilibrium of sex, that a balanced humanity may result and thus restore the world to its Edenic purity. Eventually we might be gray aliens. Equilibrium is that harmony which results from the analogy of contraries. It is the living synthesis of counterbalanced power. Thus, form may be described as the equilibrium of light and shade. Take away either factor and form is viewless. For the aspirant, there is a difference between equilibrium and balance. Equilibrium is the equalizing of all the forces in himself, while balance is a perfect adjustment of the positive and negative forces of two perfectly equalized factors at each end of the scale. Number 18 is the second initiation because 8, the number of Saturn, stands beside and is subservient to the 1, the number of the positive sun. The tests of Saturn, the initiator, then are here illumined by the sun and overcome by the magic wand of the one life now held in the initiate's right hand. Once having passed this second initiation, he can go no more back, although his temptations are great and he may fail and pervert his powers, for eventually the sun of his double initiation, 9 plus 9, 18, 9, will inevitably bring him to the third 9. If we have thus blended the Sun and Saturn, we find Saturn no longer in his malign aspect of the tester, but as he appears to one who has passed the second initiation, namely, as the star of the morning. Saturn, the grim skeleton whose path passes over the dread valley, he who tears from us every earthly thing we have clung to, again, tears or tears is 666, has now been fearlessly faced. And as the initiate looks upon him, he sees the radiance of the sun illuminating him. Henceforth, glamour has no more power to deceive. Even the glamour of the astral world no longer affrights or seduces him, for he has dared to enter it carrying the rod of power with him and has proven to himself his supremacy over it. Heretofore he may have explored in its many regions, but always under the care and guidance of his master, who has shielded him from all harm. But now he must face the insidious glamour of flattery, temptation, and promised power alone, and conquer by the aid of his rod. Here he will be tempted to the utmost, and only as he lifts high his rod can he come off a victor. Thus he is able to pass through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil, for just as a valley is a depression between two mountains, so here the initiate, having left behind the height of spiritual exaltation resulting from his balancing of earth conditions, must pass through the valley ere he is ready to climb the great height of spiritual attainment beyond. And again, if you think about the moon card in Crowley's version, there's those two, mountainy tower-looking things. There are many earnest travelers on this path who, because they thought they had reached the first stage of completion in 10 by the road of celibacy, now find that something was lacking. They now realize that 18 can only express its fullness when the two circles, now to be opened, read and inwardly digested. Now to be opened, read, and inwardly digested. They found it impossible to pass through the valley to its further end alone, hence must reincarnate in number 11 to learn the vital lesson of cooperation with their complementary mate. And no matter how objectionable the lesson is to them, they will reincarnate again and again until they have laboriously retraveled the path of evolution and learned their lesson. As we saw in our study of number 9, this is but the straightening out of the curved line in 8, and it is the angel of the great law who with the golden reed is forever measuring, straightening, and calling with love notes too persistent to resist, come back, who gives to man that power to accomplish which carries him through suffering, hardship, and deaths innumerable, yet gives him no rest until he listens to the voice and obeys. And it is through this action and reaction of 1 and 8 that man can ultimately complete the second cycle of 10 and manifest all that 18 stands for. Many who treat of numbers look upon 18 as wholly evil. Others label it the path of the senses, but from the foregoing it should be fully understood that it is the path of the purified senses, under the control of the one life. Among the 32 paths of wisdom, the 18th path is called the house of influence, by the greatness of whose abundance the influx of good things upon created beings is increased. And from the midst of the investigation, the arcana and hidden senses are drawn forth, which dwell its shade and which cling to it from the cause of all causes. Kabbalistically, number 18 is called the Stella of Light and is sacred to Mercury. The symbol of the 18th degree of the rose craw is an aquatic bird, sometimes a swan, sometimes a pelican, but always floating on the waters as the spirit or dove moves upon the waters of space or the great deep in the creation story. This swan or pelican issues periodically from the waters to give birth to 7 young ones, the sevenfold Elohim. Later, however, this symbol was represented by a pelican tearing open her bosom to feed her 7 young, which carries out the same idea and expresses all that 18 signifies. We must also consider 18 from the standpoint of 666, or 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is 9, the number of the beast, representing the struggle of the Christos, or the great creative force we call the Christ force, number 6, through the opposition of the 3 worlds. In this sense, the interpretation is quite different from that of 18, for 18 represents the individual overcoming his opposition to the divine and passing the second initiation and becoming the Superman, while the summing up of 666 represents all that Christ must overcome in the 3 worlds. This opposition, the beast, is the controlling power of this world at the present stage of evolution. It stands black and terrible with his mark in every hand or in the forehead, confronting the neophyte at every step. The mark in the hand indicates the power of the beast to prevent us from accomplishing, except according to its methods, that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And again, this is like where money holds you back from being able to be or do your will. This power we see exemplified in the business world today. The mark in the forehead indicates those who cannot think save in terms of the beast, whose very faces proclaim the shrewd avarice businessman. While the beast has been personalized by many writers and assigned to various persons and institutions which seem opposed to true Christianity, and while many such persons and institutions may have been channels for the expression of the beast, they could not have been the beast itself, for the beast includes all the forces which oppose the perfect manifestation of the Christ. From the mere inertia of matter and the accumulated evil of mankind and evil astral entities, to the conscious opposition of black magicians and the utterly selfish materialists who look upon the principles of the spiritual life as something opposed to the free indulgence of their desires, hence work against all spiritual expressions. And since man reaches his final 9 or great initiation, Only when he has conquered all opposition to the Christ within himself, so humanity and the globe itself will reach their great initiation. Only when the Christ force vanquishes the force of the beast, or banishes or manifests without opposition through man and the planet. So yeah, everyone is their man. This is what I'm trying to say about the whole 666 thing, and some of these people and YouTube and Christianity itself, really, they're manifesting the beast more than anybody else, instead of seeing all this stuff in the inward aspect of it, which is the lost word, or the lost phallus of Osiris. All these metaphors are that, and it's the hidden pillar, the fourth way, the fourth dimension. 18, considered as 6 plus 6 plus 6, shows plainly that it refers to the second initiation, not of the individual, but of humanity. Here we find not only the struggle, but the assurance of the final victory of the Christ force over the material conditions and lower creations of the physical, astral, and mental worlds. It is also the number of Baphomet, the goat of Mendes, the image of that mystical and symbolic beast, which symbolizes the synthesized power of magic, both black and white, which confronts the disciple when he reaches his second initiation. Only when we have reached mastery in the three worlds are we confronted consciously with this beast, for only then can there be any real temptation to worship him. When we hold in our hands the power of the magician, it is a very real temptation as to how we will use that power. If we use it to work for or to worship self in any of the three worlds, we fall down and worship the beast in its aspect of black magic. But if, like Jesus, we cry, "Get thee behind me, Satan," we see that once we turn away from the black side and refuse to use our hard-won powers for self, the beast becomes a symbol of the conquering Christ, or white magic. It is the true evolution from beast to man, and then to God or Superman or Christ, for like what the Christ represents. And I know by talking about this, it'll trigger people, and they'll think, oh, it's all anti-Christian. This is the anti-Christian beast system finally being exposed or coming out. And it's like, no, you are the beast system finally being exposed. This aspect of the beast is encountered only by one who has struggled with the temptations of the three worlds and mastered their forces. Only when not only the Christ man here and there has conquered, but a majority of mankind, or the race at large, has said, "Get thee behind me, Satan," will the great question be answered, as to which shall rule the three worlds, Baphomet or the Christ. In another aspect, the beast is to the world what the animal soul is to the individual. Not evil in itself, but the force of inertia which the Christ must overcome and make to vibrate in harmonious response. It is all that resists the force of the Christ life. In nature, it is that force which will turn the most highly cultivated land back to a wilderness if left to itself. That will make the most highly gifted and intellectual man a barbarian if too long separated from the restraining and also stimulating forces of civilization. See, yeah, if it wasn't for all that being held back and held down, kind of, and I'm not, again, diminishing or excusing the negative things like, the police state and all that, because I don't like it either. But again, if it wasn't for that being there, I wouldn't have seen and been had that fire within, to resist and to break free. And that's what the Saturnian cube really is about. And again, why Saturn and judges and the law and all that is there. It's like cosmos and stuff. It's necessary for that sort of friction. Like everyone knows, you need that friction kind of for a real something really to change. That will make a body ferment, putrefy, and ultimately disintegrate once the divine spark of life has left it. It is the natural brutishness of man which expresses as Bolshevism and anarchy once he refuses to obey the voice of the divine guidance, or lets go the guiding thread of life, conscience, which would lead him out of the labyrinth of inharmonious physical conditions through the path of law and order. And that's another aspect of, I guess, this 18 and the black the 666 in its negative sense is the fact that people lose their will or give up. They willingly give up their will to the group or to the hive or to whatever, to trends or to the fad or to what's popular. It's very hive mind. Anyone who's been in high school and been targeted, or anyone who has been in a hostile work environment, knows that even some of the nicest people who you thought would be your friends will go with the crowd and in a sort of animalistic way, it's like again brings up the whole tradition and all that knowledge of the witch trials and stuff, where people who weren't even, it was used as a way to persecute and scapegoat people, again, by some of the Christians and the good guys. And it just goes to show the paradox. And anyway, although this force is not evil in itself, being but a lack of response to the higher, it becomes evil when man, who should work with the one life in its mission of redemption, uses his powers to mold. Just making sure it's recording. To mold this inert and negative phase of life to pander to his lower passions and desires, or give expression to the beast in him. Hence, those who receive the number of the beast in their hands are those who are either actively or supinely working with the forces of nature which tend to interfere with harmonious manifestations of life on the planet. Only the manifestations of the Christ principle can hold this earth in the hollow of his hand and mold from it a perfected theater for the perfected man's further evolution. The beast is also the primitive force of matter, restless and ill at ease, and tending ever towards disruption, each separate atom seeking to manifest its own form of life at the expense of the rest, as seen in Cancer. It is chaos before it is informed by the light of the one life and started on its evolution toward cosmos. This force is always striving with the creative force, the Christ, struggling to go back to the nothingness from which it emerged. Hence we call the number 6 the Christ force, struggling in matter, and 666 the inertia and opposition which the Christ must overcome in the three worlds. In Revelation we read, "Here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man." This verse refers to the animal man while he is yet in the stage of unfoldment symbolized by the 666, or when the Christ in him is still struggling with ignorance, indifference, and the sway of the animal instincts by which he is ruled in that stage, while 144 is the number of a man, the Superman, who has mastered and become the angel. So, again, makes me think of cancer and AIDS and all the fact, again, death and the transcendence of life and death, and again, alien life and all that is implied in 666. And it seems to me again, until humanity does the inner work, so to speak, and really gets beyond some of this external crap, only then will we have reached a stage of maturity, I think, to possess either one of those. Which I don't think even the whole immortality thing is quite what they're trying to do, which is the whole uploading of brains and memories and stuff. That's obviously not true life. That's the Clifothic restoration. The whole Zion thing and the Matrix and all that is very much related to that. And it's in this book, The Key of Destiny, in the number 22. They talk about how eternal life is really the harvest of many deaths, and it's clinging to the ego, and it's a trap. And only through, again, going through death and still regaining the soul vitality, that's the only true immortality, basically. And it's through this sort of work that humanity as a whole will never get it. It's only going to be through a few. That's why they say the 144. And I don't expect even. It's not. I'm not even saying, oh, I'm immortal, and I you know, again, I'm subject to everything anyone else is at any given time. So it just so happens that I have seen and have had experiences that have pointed me into certain like directions. It's all come into a sort of point, and so I've had to process it myself, and I want to, again, help other people who haven't seen this sort of thing to get beyond that sort of negative outlook of 666 and the black iron prison of the whole Saturnian cube thing. And I'll have to get into all this stuff slowly, like I said, over time. But yeah, I wanted to go through that 18 thing because it's important and it ties in directly with what I keep seeing almost daily and how this sort of stuff is a sort of solution or a reply or response to that. And so, yeah, I know this is long. A lot of it's lost in that length because most people won't watch this or take their time and read all that stuff. But I think eventually it will trickle its way through, and again, it's not like designed or it's not made to be a mass produced, mass understood thing. As much as people need to get over some of this stuff and integrate this knowledge so we can move on. Unfortunately, I see it's not as easy as that, but I guess that's really what the whole 18 thing I'm trying to get at is how technology and its usefulness or its negative aspect is all dependent on the motive. And not like knowledge is power, and at the same time it can also be very, again, that whole Saturnian lead thing. It's very weighty, it's very takes time, all these negative, even just with this, what I was talking about, how this is so long, and it's very Saturnian, but that's just the way it is. And makes me think of The Grudge by Tool. Again, Tool talks about some of this stuff in these abstract ways. And other bands I mentioned, Twisted, Skinny Puppy, even I've been listening to a lot. And just, I mean, I don't know. Everyone has their own way of interpreting things, and mine is just of looking at everything I can